Hi, have you recognized how unusual the weather has been this year? There's been so many storms coming up quickly and leaving devastation wherever they go. Some of us have gone through storms of our own, those unexpected, terrible times that leave devastation in our life, or maybe it's only near devastation. Mark 4 tells the story of Jesus and his disciples who were caught out in the middle of an unexpected storm. Verse 35 of Mark 4 starts out this way. On the same day when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side." Now when they left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that it was already filling. Storms. Sometimes, even with the best technology and weather forecast, they come without warning. This had been an ordinary day. Jesus teaching the multitudes, fishermen in their boats. Then he spent time with the disciples answering their questions. And that afternoon, while the multitude were still wanting more teaching, more healing, and they were all around him, Jesus decided that they were to get into the boats and cross over to the other side. Now, those disciples, they were tired too. But because Jesus requested it, they got in and they started rowing and making their way toward the other side. You know, they were probably counting on a good rest in a couple of hours when they made it to the other side. After all, the trip wouldn't take that long, and being in a boat out on the sea, hey, that was better than being surrounded by the multitudes, everybody pushing and wanting more. But one thing about storms, they interrupt our plans. Plans for the quiet boat ride was interrupted when the storm blew in, threatening to drown them. Peter and the others, they were used to storms. They were used to being out in the open sea. These were experienced fishermen, and they did not start out foolishly. They didn't think, "Oh, there's going to be a thunderstorm. Let me see if I can't make..." No, they didn't think that at all. But these waves, they kept spilling into the boat, and they were supposed to be moving toward land, toward rest, but it took everything they had just to row. And our plans often get interrupted by unexpected storms. We make plans that seem simple enough to carry out, but storms happen. God did not promise an easy trip, but he does promise that we'll make it to the other side. And he gives us these promises to produce faith. Faith, well, it's always tested. And that's one reason that we go through trials. Trials are like pop quizzes. Just like the storms, they come when we're unexpected. Fishermen had that unexpected pop quiz on their faith, and they failed. And just like many of us, when we go through a test, take a test, fail, you have to have it over, do a redo. And one thing about the pop quiz is because they come unexpectedly, you go into them just as you are, which is all too often unprepared. That's the way it was with Jesus and the men. It says they took him along in the boat just as he was. That means Jesus had been teaching all day. He was tired. But there was no time for a drive-through at the local fish and chips, no time to change those hot, sweaty clothes, no time for a break, get his rain gear out, no time for anything. He left the people and got in the boat. Jesus got on in peace because he knew that the Father would take care of him. So, what did he do? He took a nap. That should have encouraged those fishermen, even though they were going through the storms. But sometimes we're like them. We look about in the midst of the storms and the waves, and when we see life is coming in, crashing on top of us, we think God's asleep. And he's not doing anything to help us. He's unconcerned with what we're doing, regardless of our cries for help and regardless of our prayers. He doesn't seem to care. The truth is, he does care. He's just not worrying. He's at peace. That ship was ill-fitted for a storm, which made danger more imminent and the miracle more striking. Our life can be more stormy than calm at times. And those fishermen, even if they'd spent the entire day getting ready themselves, getting the boat ready, would they really have been prepared? And life events are like that. When the storms come, we might think we're ready. We've done everything we can, but we're really not prepared for it when it comes. When we realize how unprepared we are, we lose our perspective. And that's what happened. Mark 38 says, "But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?'" In the midst of a bad storm, when everything looked grave, fear can rise in the bravest, and that fear makes us lose our focus. Fear sometimes plays with our mind, especially if it hasn't been anchored in the right place to start with. The popular philosophy of many is, fear comes because of disobedience. Well, they were in their storm because they were doing what Jesus said. They were obeying him. So, maybe if the storm came because they listened to Jesus, it had to be his fault. I mean, if he had not insisted that they cross right then, they would have waited. They would have waited till they were rested. Or they would have waited and either sailed later in the day, because most storms happen in the mid-afternoon, or they would have got up the next morning and traveled earlier. Either way, they would have missed the storm if it hadn't been for Jesus saying, "Let's go now." These fishermen saw the imminent danger and said, "We are perishing. This was the worst storm ever. I've never been in a storm like this." And new situations bring fear, doubt, aloneness. They were having a panic attack right there in the middle of the sea. And Jesus, well, he seemed unconcerned, certainly unaware. Oh, they believed that Jesus was the Messiah, that he could do miracles, but their fears prevailed. They lost faith. This was a cowardly fear. It's natural to be afraid in the storm, but not to such a high degree as this. The greatest danger was not the winds and waves on the outside, but it was the unbelief in their heart. And our greatest threat is the problem and the storm within us as well. It's not what's going on around us, but what's going on in our minds and in our hearts. Unbelief caused fear, and fear made them question, who is Jesus? And when consumed by fear, we not only lose our perspective, but we think irrationally, and we react irrationally as well. Those men who had spent their life out on the sea, they woke up Jesus calling, "Teacher, don't you care that we are perishing?" This was more criticism than a cry for help. Jesus, yes, he does miracles, but when it comes to having the water coming into the boat, it's better to have a bucket ready for bailing than have him around. They rebuked him for sleeping. They didn't call him master. They didn't call him Lord, but they called him teacher. Yet, they really did not understand his teaching. Despite their belief in Jesus as a miracle worker, they had not grasped that he was the Son of God. They were not concerned about his fate either, or what would become to him if they perished. Who's going to take care of the boat? The boat goes down, Jesus would sink too. They didn't care. No, it was all about them, and they wanted him to know that. They didn't reason out that Jesus is in the boat, and if he is not going to go down, it's not likely that we are either. There was power in Jesus, but the sound of the waves, the sound of the storm, overshadowed who he was and what he could really do. They felt all alone in his presence with others all around him. And that's what happens. Storms make us feel alone. But they weren't alone. Mark told us that there were other boats all around him. So sometimes we feel unalone even when people are around us. The historian Josephus tells us that at any one time there were probably over 300 boats on the Sea of Galilee. So they're really not alone. There were other people in their boats going through the exact same storm, but the presence of other boats had no impact on their boat. The people in the next boat were there, but they still felt all alone. They had Jesus in their boat, but what good was he? He was fatigued from too many days of teaching in the hot Judean sun, meeting the needs of other people and not theirs. And he was just continuously giving out, but nothing. They thought he's got nothing left to give, and I need him now. And here he is with no demands on his time and a few minutes of downtime. He goes into just a sound sleep, a deep sleep, so that the noise of the storm, the violent wind, the rocking of the boat, the men calling out and working, nothing would awake him. His deep sleep showed how far the disciples thought that he really was from them. Actually, what they thought is Jesus was there, but he wasn't with them. They thought, he has no idea of what we're going through. And just like us, they just wanted to know that he cares. And we all want to know someone cares now with what we're going through. That question, don't you care? It was both rude and misunderstanding. They forgot their place. They did not know who he was, and they did not really mean what they were saying. But they were reacting in fear and anger, and so often we do the same thing, only later to regret the words that we said. Tired, those disciples had embarked on the journey because Jesus had said that. The storm blew in, increasing the threat that they would all be capsized. And worst of all, Jesus was sleeping. He didn't realize that they were going to die. They woke Jesus. They did not expect him to do anything. Those men didn't even know that he could. They just wanted him to be awake and to worry with them. It's like little Catherine. Her mother sent her on an errand. Catherine was gone much too long. When she returned, the mother demanded an explanation. Catherine said, I was going and I met Jenny, and she was crying because she broke her doll. And the mother said, so you helped her fix her doll? Oh, no, said Catherine. I sat down and helped her cry. Sometimes That's all we think we need. It's all we want is someone just to sit down and help us cry. That's what Jesus heard the disciples saying. They were saying, really, don't you care? We want you to care about what's going on. These men of compassion had seen miracles of compassion in other lives, but now they wanted to know if he cared for them. In the greatest life crisis that they were going through, he appeared indifferent. And so they wanted to know if he cared. I don't care hurts. It hurts a lot. It hurts for them, and it hurts for us. But then they saw his actions. They saw what he did, and they heard his questions, and they began to even wonder every more. You see, storms also cause us to wonder. Verses 38 and 39 says, Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Abruptly awoken, Jesus gets up and speaks to the wind, speaks to the waves, calm, peace. Now, can you think of just how great this miracle is? Can you comprehend it? I'm sure that the disciples did. It was a miracle that the wind stopped, the waves got calm, but for them to happen at the exact same moment, it's like, think about having a basin of water, and you put your hand in it, and you move the water all around. You take your hand out. That would be the wind stopping. That water keeps moving until it becomes calm. It does not immediately stop as soon as you take your hand out. But that's what happened. Immediately, the wind stopped, and at that exact very same second moment, the wind was calm. The sea stopped. The sudden hushing of the wind would not normally calm the sea. He commanded both elements. He rebuked the wind and said to the waves, Be calm and remain calm. The noise stopped. A noise, whether around us or in our mind, can be threatening, terrifying. The storms are loud, they're strong, but they're never so loud that we can't hear his voice. In the confusion and in the fear, Jesus speaks to our personal storm, and he says, Be still, to our circumstances and to our hearts. Sometimes we don't hear his words because we are so afraid of the storm and its outcome. And so in verse 40, but he said to them, Why are you fearful? How is it that you have no faith? The storm was over. Now, Jesus rebukes them for being fearful, acting like cowards when they should have had faith in him. Faith in his presence, the fact that he was actually there, even if they could not see him actively moving in their behalf. Jesus never asked them, Why didn't you stop the storm and let me sleep? No, Jesus never asked that because he knew that they could not, and he did not even want them to try. He wanted them to have faith in him and in his presence. But they did not know who he was. That's very evident in verse 41. And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, Who can this be that even the wind and the sea obey him? Despite their long association, they did not understand who Jesus was. They were astonished by the action of a person who appeared to be so much like them. They feared exceedingly. They were struck with a deep awe and the deep realization of his incredible power. Not the cowardly fear of verse 40, but the Greek word conveys the idea of awe and reverence felt in the presence of a divine power. No wonder they feared. Miracles displayed Jesus' divinity. And they were afraid when they did not know who he was or what he could do, but now they're even more afraid recognizing who Jesus is. Speaking to the sea, that was something that only happened by the God of the Old Testament. So this must be God in their boat. Now, being with the human, compassionate Jesus, that was fine. But being with the powerful, supernatural Son of God, that's terrifying. And for us and for them, the difference between going through the storm and being in the midst of the storm are different. Our perspective of Jesus changes once we come through the storm and we begin to understand that he really is God and that he cares enough to stay with us in the storm and help us survive it. He does care. He didn't stop with calming the elements, but he turned from the sea and addressed their words. He showed that he cared by first dealing with the storm before he spoke to them. He knew that while they were in the storm, they would never hear, and even if they heard, they would not listen. And he wanted to speak to their hearts. They wanted him to do. He wanted them to believe, to trust. Jesus rebuked them for being afraid. But they were shocked that he could speak and control the elements. They should not be. They knew that he could perform miracles for others, but not that he could control nature or control their storms. Storms, it was out of control. Their fears were out of control, but Jesus was never out of control. And when our hearts are troubled like the sea which cannot rest, our emotions are unruly, hear him say, "Peace, be still. Be silent. Do not be moved by what you hear, by what you see. Do not speak without thinking, but just be still. Be calm." When the storm is loud and strong, Jesus can still our storm with a word. He is the one who made the sea, and he's the one who can calm it. The Lord of the wind and waves is in your boat. The Lord of every situation is right there with you. Peace and faith come with knowing Jesus has the power over storms. He can quiet them. He controls both storms of nature and storms of the heart. Sometimes the stormy areas make us feel that God does not care. Then, in faith, we remember, we trust, because he is still the Lord who cares, even if he appears to be sleeping and not visibly acting on our behalf. He is there, and he does care.